Matthew chapter 5. I've been recently experiencing something repeatedly that I shared with some of you, and that is I will be having a good day, I'll be in a good mood, and I'll spend 5 minutes looking at the headlines, and I become depressed and distressed and upset. Anyone else? Yeah. In 2 days, our country goes to vote. And as you know, there are a lot of people that are concerned about what might take place. Number one, there's the actual result of the voting. People of both parties are extremely concerned about the direction of our country and what should happen if the other guy wins. So there's all the distress and concern about the future leadership of our nation. But maybe even more so, there's the concern and distress about what is likely to happen with the violence as the election takes place in the days after, particularly if there's some sort of contest about the election results being fair or not. A recent poll said 3/4 of Americans are afraid of what might happen with post-election violence. Stores in Washington, D.C. are already boarding up windows in order to make sure that it doesn't affect them. So as we sit here this morning and look off at what might happen in the next week, we are right to be concerned. And our response can be either that we view ourselves as, powerless victims watching our nation fall apart in front of us and feel desperate and wring our hands and be anxious and fearful. But if we have that type of reaction, we will be showing that we've forgotten our role in this world. And that's what the sermon is about today. Our role in this world is very clear according to God. And we're going to need to make sure we step into it in this coming week. Look at Matthew chapter 5 and verses 13 through 16. Familiar verses, but something that we need to be reminded of. Matthew 5:13. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Remember the time period that these words were spoken by Jesus. The people listening to him that day in this Sermon on the Mount knew a level of poverty that none of us have ever lived in. They had sky-high taxes that were crushing them and collected by scoundrels who were cheating them even in the collection of the sky-high taxes. They had absolutely no say in their government. Their government just did whatever it wanted. And if you rebelled, you were crucified. We don't begin to understand the level of difficulty they lived under. And yet, on this mountain, with these words, Jesus is saying to these really troubled people, look, yes, you are living in troubled times, but you have an important role to play in these troubled times. An important role to play in these troubled times. First thing he says, you are the salt and light of the world. Now, if I came up to you today and I said, hey, you are salt, how would you react to that? You'd probably scratch your head and think I was crazy. Why would I call a person salt? We think of salt as something that sits on a table and makes food taste better, right? But there are other uses for salt. We know that. We know that when roads get icy, sidewalks get icy, salt makes it better from the threat of falling. We know when there is the threat of food going rotten, that salt put on it will slow down the spread of rot. We know that when wounds are infected, salt can help heal wounds. When there are things that are going wrong, when there's ice, when there's infection, when there is perishable food, salt comes along and makes things better. And that's what Jesus meant when he was saying to us that we are salt. There is infection in the world. There is wounds in the world. There are threats in the world. Our job is to be like salt, that when applied to these things, it pushes back the threat. It pushes back the trouble they cause. That's the effect of salt. And Jesus says, we are the salt of this earth. So when things go bad, we're to be there to push it back. And that is the first role that God has for us in this world. And this is here on your inserts. The first role is to resist evil in the world. Resist the things that are going wrong in the world. That's what he means when he says you are salt. To resist the evil. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ today, you have that role. And here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to say with me, I am here to resist evil in the world. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, say that with me right now. I am here to resist evil in the world. That's why you're here, one of your roles in the world. But the other role has to do with light. Now we today go into a room that's dark, flip a switch, instant light, all over. Brilliant. It's a little bit different in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, when the sun went down, everything went black. Streets went black, businesses, homes, rooms went black. You didn't have anything. But a family had a way out by taking a little saucer, putting some oil in it, a wick, light it, and now you can stare at your family through kind of a smoky dimness. But that was considered a great treasure back then because there was good coming out of this little tiny lamp that was in a shining light of good in the darkness. And that was a treasure to them back then. And that's what Jesus is saying here as our second rule as we look at these things. We are a light in a dark place. We are shining good in a dark world. And that, as it says in your insert, our second role is to promote good in this world. To promote good in this world. To resist what is evil, and then to promote good. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ this morning, say this with me. Here we go. I am here to promote good in the world. You are here to promote good, to resist evil, and to promote what's good in this world. Now, how do we apply this to our lives? As I said, in the next few days, we could see a lot go wrong in our country. We could see things like we've never seen during an election time. And things that are very, very bad. And we can sit there and wring our hands and be anxious and worried about what's going on. But God says that's not your role. Your role, when we see these things next week, is to tell our truths about two different things. And this is in your insert. Number one, when you see things going wrong on the news, tell yourself, number one truth, God controls the gate that allows trouble in the world. Remember that. God controls the gate that allows trouble in this world. It is not controlled by wicked men. It is not controlled by wicked governments. It is not controlled even by demons. Wicked men and governments and demons plot evil all the time. But God is the one who stands at the gate and controls if their evil is going to be allowed to be released or if it's going to be stopped. And many times he stops it. But many other times, he says, I will allow it, but on my timetable and for my purposes. On my timetable, not before and not after, I will allow certain evil plots to go forward. And I will only allow it on my purposes. And what does he say about his purposes? That he works in his purposes for all things work together for good to those who love God. And that's why he says it's counted all joy when you have problems. Do not ever be afraid. Do not ever worry, because I'm in charge, and I will ultimately work it for good in your life. And yes, it may go through a very terrible time of suffering. And God has done that in the past, and he promises to do it in the future, to lead his people as they go through terrible times of suffering. But he's promised us it will end for ultimate good in those who love him. So God wants us to remember, as we read these bad headlines, he's in control of the gate that allows trouble into this world. He is in control of the gate who takes office in the world. Right? Lots of people plot to take over governments and to be in charge and spend tons of money and do all they can to influence nations, but God is the one who has the final word, not people, not people. Many times God stops people who try to take over nations. Many times God has said yes to evil people who've tried to control nations, but it's not because they were in charge. It's because he is in charge, and he has decided to use their bad for ultimate good. And there might be a time of testing coming upon our government, upon our nation, through our government. You may not get the person you're convinced should be the next president of the United States, and the country may not go in the direction that you want it to go. But God says, don't believe that those groups are the ones who have the final say. I have the final say. And sometimes I let evil have its way in order to bring ultimate good. It might be in the United States' best interest to go through a deep time of testing, and through that testing come to know Him. God is the one who has perfect knowledge. He is with us. And He says, when we read the headlines this week, if they are bad, I am the one who stands at the gate and allows trouble in. So be calm. Trust. I've got a plan going on. And then number 2, take your role and fulfill it. The second truth that we need to tell ourselves this week is God chooses us to stand against troubles in this world. God chooses you and me to stand against troubles in the world. He allows them in, and then He says, your role, your salt and your light. And that means you need to respond to the troubles. Number 1, we need to resist them, that like salt does. Like salt pushes back ice and pushes back infection. You are to move in and push back trouble that is in this world. When Elisha saw 400 prophets of Baal threatening Israel and leading them astray, he stood up against them. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had the king command that the whole world bow down before him and his golden idol, they stood up against him. And when Jesus saw God's holy temple being destroyed by scoundrels selling to make merchandise of God's things, Jesus stood up against them. They were being sold. And God calls you and me to stand up in the same way against the evil that goes on. When we see people mistreating people, when we see crimes being committed, when we see lies being told, God says, stand up and resist that. Do what you can to push back evil. That is what so many people will need to be concerned about when the church is raptured and suddenly the salt is gone. And there can be some decent sinners who are left, but not like the church, whose role is to push back evil in the world. Suddenly that evil is not going to have the stopping that is going on now. And that is our role. We are likely to see trouble in the next couple days of this week. Use the headlines as a prayer list for us not only to take action, but also to pray and to pray and to pray for God's mighty hand to come upon people that we watch who are doing evil things, to hold them accountable for what they've done, to stop what they've done, and let justice be done. We have that role. We're not supposed to be just spectators watching the world headlines and wringing our hands. God says, jump in there and be the salt you can by taking action and getting active in prayer to be able to release God's power to push back evil. Then also, in addition to pushing back evil, is also promoting what's good. Romans 12:21 says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Overcome evil with good. And that is our response too. When we see wrong things being done, move in with good. When we see people who are mistreating us, to respond with love to them. People that are enemies, we pray for them. People that are abusing others, we encourage and help and strengthen those who are being abused, bringing in good wherever we can. In our nation, that means being model citizens. Model citizens. At our workplaces, model employees. Model employees. Being model neighbors and model parents and model spouses. That's what God has called us to do, to aim high, so that whether we eat or drink or whatever we do, we're reflecting God's brilliance in this world. Like the moon reflects the sun's brilliance, you and I, in all we do, reflect God's brilliance into this dark place. And helping people to understand the core issue of life when we do that, and that is everyone in this world is seeking the same thing. Everyone in this world, whether they know it or not, is seeking Jesus. Right? People spend their time seeking possessions and seeking power and seeking pleasure. All these things, trying to fill up a hole in their hearts. But God tells us that hole is shaped like my son Jesus. And only he will fill that hole in our hearts. And when you and I respond by shining his brilliant glory in this world, we're telling the world there is only one hope. There's only one way to fill that heart, and that is coming to Jesus, bringing him into your heart, and knowing his peace and forgiveness. Jesus has been working since the very beginning to get mankind in a right relationship with God. He died on the cross and rose again to get mankind into a right relationship with God. He is the only one that can fill our hearts. And I ask you this morning, have you answered his call to open up your heart personally to him, to receive him as the God who saves your life, forgives your sins, and brings peace to you? He's able to do that, but only if you respond to him. If you've not received Jesus Christ, receive him today. Receive his forgiveness, receive his peace, and doing that, you will receive your very, very important role in this world of being salt and light, resisting evil, and promoting good in this world. Let me ask, how would you react if you saw a policeman standing, watching as another person got robbed and mugged, and the thief ran off? And he just stood there. Or if worse than that, he stood there wringing his hands and looking anxious and worried and fearful. When we next week, this coming week, see people in our nation being victimized, terrorized, scared, their lives and businesses burning on the screen, and we're praying that that doesn't happen, but if it does, you and I can't just look on. And we can't just look on in fear and wringing our hands and worry. God says, fulfill your role. Take your role. Be the salt. Be the light. Through your actions and through your prayers, push back against that evil and display and bring in as much good as you can. That's our role in this world if you are a follower of Jesus Christ. And let's just close by saying that once again. Repeat after me. I am here to resist evil in the world. I am here to resist evil in the world. And I am here to promote good in the world. I am here to promote good in the world. That's our role for all time, but especially this coming week. If trouble happens, take our role and do the good and resist the evil that God has called us to do.